Imagine this. A powerful general, known for her strength and leadership, is publicly humiliated by cops, tied to a tree like a criminal. But what happens next will blow your mind. The entire military shows up and everything changes. You won't believe how this intense showdown unfolds. If you're ready for jaw-dropping stories like this, hit that like button and subscribe right now to the Black Visionaries family because you won't want to miss what happens next. It was a bright, clear morning when the unthinkable happened. In the heart of a small, peaceful town, an incident occurred that would forever change the lives of those involved. What began as an ordinary day, a routine military operation on a nearby reconnaissance mission, quickly spiraled into a story of humiliation, power, and the strength of military unity. General Sophia Marshall, a woman known for her toughness, discipline, and sharp mind, had led her team on what seemed like a simple mission. The objective was to investigate disturbances in a neighboring area. Little did she know, however, that this seemingly straightforward operation would set off a chain of events that would shake the very core of the town. General Marshall, a woman who had led countless missions in hostile territories, had earned a reputation for being tough but fair. Her commanding presence was something to behold, and her military career was a testament to her resilience. She was a leader respected by her soldiers, admired by her peers, and feared by enemies. In a field dominated by men, she had broken barriers, proving time and again that she could lead with the best of them. But on this day, something entirely unexpected happened. As General Marshall and her unit approached the outskirts of the town, they were ambushed by a group of local law enforcement officers. These officers had received word of potential military presence in the area, and they were on edge. Not recognizing the woman at the helm of the military operation, they assumed they were dealing with an unauthorized military presence. It was clear the officers were on high alert, but what followed was beyond anyone's comprehension. The situation escalated faster than anyone could have predicted. Fearing for their safety, the officers made a snap decision that would have massive consequences. They surrounded the group, taking control of the soldiers' weapons and placing General Marshall under arrest. They did not know who she was. The woman they had just captured was not some ordinary civilian or unknown soldier. She was a general in the military. But in their ignorance, they treated her like an enemy combatant, not understanding the gravity of the situation. Without hesitation, the officers tied General Marshall to a tree in the center of the town square. A woman who had once commanded entire battalions, now reduced to a helpless figure. The image of her, restrained and humiliated, was beyond belief. This wasn't just an ordinary military officer being disrespected. This was a high-ranking general. And in that moment, her authority was disregarded. The humiliation was palpable. General Marshall, a woman who had seen the horrors of war, had stood tall in the face of danger countless times, was now forced to endure this degrading act. She had faced down enemy forces, commanded under the most challenging circumstances, and yet, here she was, tied to a tree, humiliated by the very officers who should have been respecting her. As she struggled against the ropes, her thoughts raced. How could this happen? How had they not recognized her? In her military career, she had faced many trials, but this was a first. She knew she had to stay calm. She couldn't show weakness, not now. While she stood there, powerless and enraged, the situation was quickly becoming a spectacle. The sight of a general, a woman in command, treated like this by local officers was something no one could ignore. Bystanders quickly started recording the event, and soon the video of her humiliation spread across social media. The clip, showing General Marshall tied to the tree, went viral within minutes. It wasn't just local news, it became national, even international news. As the video circulated, the image of the military leader, helpless and humiliated, sent shockwaves through the world. The media reacted immediately. The hashtag Justice for General Marshall trended globally. People were outraged. How could law enforcement treat such a highly respected officer in this manner? Why didn't they recognize her for who she was? The questions and criticisms mounted quickly. The story was no longer just about a general's mistreatment. It became a symbol of how authority, respect, and power were handled in times of crisis. By the time the video reached the higher levels of military command, it was clear the situation could no longer be ignored. Top military officials were in disbelief. The phone lines were flooded with calls from military leaders, government officials, and even political figures. How had this happened? Who was responsible for such an egregious mistake? How could law enforcement, who were supposed to protect the citizens and uphold the law, treat someone like General Marshall this way? As the morning turned to afternoon, the news of General Marshall's capture and humiliation continued to spread. People all over the country were reacting with anger and disbelief. Military families were especially vocal, expressing outrage that one of their own was being treated so disrespectfully. It wasn't just about the general being tied to a tree, it was about the message it sent. If this could happen to General Marshall, could it happen to anyone in the military? The incident raised serious questions about the relationship between law enforcement and the military, as well as the lack of recognition and respect for the men and women in uniform. Meanwhile, General Marshall, though bruised and humiliated, refused to give in to despair. She knew she had to keep her composure. Her soldiers were watching, her colleagues were watching, and the entire nation was watching. If she showed weakness now, it would only add fuel to the fire. She held her head high, refusing to let the humiliation break her spirit. Little did the police officers know, they had unleashed a storm that would soon come crashing down on them. As news of this situation reached the military's top brass, a plan was quickly set in motion. Within hours, a convoy of military vehicles rolled into the town. The sound of engines roaring and the sight of military trucks barreling down the streets sent waves of shock through the small town. People stood on the sidewalks, unsure of what was happening. They had heard the rumors, seen the videos, and now they were about to witness the military's response. The sight of the military arriving in full force left no one in doubt. They were not going to let this go. Colonel James Daniels, a high-ranking officer who had served alongside General Marshall for many years, was one of the first to arrive. His reputation for decisiveness and unwavering loyalty to his fellow officers was well known. He was a man who rarely spoke, but when he did, it was always with authority. His eyes, filled with determination, scanned the town square as he led his team of soldiers to the police station. There was no time for diplomacy. The officers who had committed this act of humiliation would now face the consequences. Inside the station, the police officers were taken by surprise. They were not prepared for the force that had just arrived. Daniels, without hesitation, marched directly to the officer in charge and demanded, "Where is General Marshall?" His voice was firm, unwavering. There was no room for negotiation. The officer, visibly shaken, stumbled to respond. Within moments, General Marshall was untied and escorted to safety. But this was far from over. Colonel Daniels, his voice cold with fury, made it clear that the officers responsible for the humiliation would not go unpunished. A full investigation was launched. No one would escape the consequences of this act. Public outrage only fueled the military's resolve to ensure that this never happened again. The officers who had humiliated General Marshall were placed on administrative leave, and the local law enforcement's credibility was now in question. As the days passed, the town found itself divided. Some people supported the police, believing that they had done their best in a chaotic situation. Others saw the military's intervention as a necessary response to a gross injustice. The debate raged on in local cafes, bars, and town halls. But one thing was clear. The events of that day would not be forgotten. The police officers involved would never live down the public scandal, and the military would never forget the betrayal that led to their general's humiliation. For General Marshall, the road ahead was challenging but empowering. Her reputation, once tarnished by the video of her tied to a tree, became a symbol of resilience. She had endured public humiliation, but in the end, it was her strength that shone through. The military's response to the incident demonstrated the power of unity, of standing together against injustice. The officers who had humiliated her may have thought they had won that day, but in the end, it was General Marshall and her military comrades who came out victorious. As the story of her humiliation spread across the globe, General Marshall's career continued. She stood tall, a symbol of strength and resilience in the face of adversity, and the town, once divided, would never be the same. What began as a simple misunderstanding had turned into an international story of power, respect, and the consequences of treating a military leader with such disregard. The general's reputation was not only restored but strengthened by the events that followed, and the officers who had humiliated her would live with the knowledge that they had crossed a line they could never come back from. In the end, General Marshall's strength and her military's response proved that no amount of humiliation could break the bond between a leader and her troops. The entire nation had witnessed this powerful display of unity, and they would never forget the lessons learned from that day. Hey, if you're rolling with the Black Visionaries family, you already know what to do. Smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because we've got more powerful, jaw-dropping stories coming your way that you won't want to miss. Stay inspired, stay strong, and remember, your dignity is never up for debate.